The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. I'm going to preface this by saying I am not an active Reddit user. I've had my account for a couple years now, but it was mainly during high school to find and share memes with my friends. I think I've made like one post and that's about it. I joined this subreddit at the suggestion of one of my friends who helped me put my thoughts together, and he said this would belong here. So I hope he's right. If my writing is not the best, I'm sorry. I failed English twice, so please don't expect too much from me. There is a lot I don't remember about my childhood. I can remember bits and pieces of it. A flash here and a memory there. A smile, a cake with candles and my sister, Anna. Any of my earliest memories featured Anna. She was a year younger than me, and she was my absolute best friend in the whole world. I was 5 when Anna was taken. The last time I saw Anna was 17 years ago, and still to this day I feel the ache of missing her in my bones. It wrecks me every time I think about her. Sometimes it's too much for me to bear. A lot of the details around my sister's disappearance remain unknown to me. My mum never mentions her. She never had any pictures around the house. It was like she wanted to forget that Anna existed. Maybe she thought I was too young to remember her. And she's right. The only time I see my sister are in the flashes of memories I'll have. Never for too long, and the more I dwell on her memory, the more I forget her. A friend of my roommate is studying to become a therapist and says the gaps in my memory from my childhood are a sign of CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I don't want to see any shrinks though to confirm her diagnosis. I'm well adjusted. So, with this out of the way, let me get into the crux of things. My name is Sophie. I am 22 years old and I go to the University of Wollongong, where I'm studying to become a primary school teacher. For anyone unaware of Australian school systems, primary school is students from 5 and 6, kindergartens, to 11 and 12, year 6. I don't know why I wanted to pursue a career in teaching. I was never really the brightest bulb in the box and was a terrible student. I hated my own school experience. I remember seeing a brochure for it on my guidance counselor's desk one day in year 12 and decided that's what I'd do. No real passion for it, but I'm already here, so I may as well finish. Not like my debt will go away if I drop out now. It's currently winter break from the university, so no classes, no school placements, and those who can go home normally do. Since leaving home, I've never returned. Mum's never mentioned missing me, never invites me over, so I don't bother. I should miss her and miss home, but I don't. It was never much of a home after Anna disappeared. Things are just easier in the dorm room I share with Amelia, my roommate. She's studying to be a vet, which is nice. Something she is visibly passionate about. She's due to finish her course after the next semester, and I've got another 2 years left, so soon enough we'll have to part ways. But I choose to forget about that, and to live in blissful ignorance until all her stuff is packed, and she's gone. A deep part of me resents Amelia, though. Resents might not be the best word. She actually has found something she's passionate about. She came to school with a plan and has almost achieved it. It's a sad and bitter part of myself I like to keep hidden, but I long to find the same passion for anything in my life, rather than just floating around. Existing. It's just pointless. Envious might be a better suited word. So, with this winter break, Amelia, myself, and a couple of her friends who also stay on campus for break tend to hang out. I don't really know her friends well, and I'm only ever invited due to my status as roommate, but if it keeps me occupied, I won't complain. The last time they all hung out was a week or so ago at a flat belonging to two of Amelia's friends. Honestly, time has sort of blurred together while forming this. The only one to keep me tethered to reality is Amelia and my friend Chris. Chris was a boy who I went to school with. He's the reason I have a Reddit account in the first place, and without him, I never would have had the courage to post on here. Amelia and Chris are probably the only friends I have. I lost contact with everyone else from high school. Chris wasn't here for these events, but he knows what's happened and drove up here to keep me sane. From our old town, it takes about 4 hours to get to Wollongong, so him taking the time to drive up here for me is truly amazing. I don't know what I did to deserve a friend like him. Since it's the winter break, we get a month off in between our 2 semesters. Amelia and I knew this would be my last chance to fully relax. We knew when classes start up again, I would be completing a school placement for the rest of my course, working as a teacher's aide for the final stretch of my uni course. Most of these placements lead to proper jobs by the end, but it is never guaranteed. I'd have to be on my best behavior, act like a real teacher would act. It wouldn't be too difficult for me. I've never touched any kind of illicit drugs until last week, and I've never liked the taste of alcohol. The role of deso driver is normally given to me since I'm always the sober one at parties. Amelia and her friends hung out over a week ago. I was, of course, also invited. It was in her friend Kyle and Danny's flat. I always wondered how they afforded the flat. It was close to the beaches and the main party strip of Wollongong. Neither Kyle or Danny worked from what I knew, and they were both failing their Bachelor of Art courses, so I figured their parents must be rich or some shit. So, there we were, in the boys' large flat, music playing, more people joining until there were 5 others, excluding myself. No one really paid much attention to me, so I sat towards the window facing the ocean and scrolled aimlessly on my phone. The screen would keep going fuzzy, so I'd have to leave the phone on the windowsill while the picture returned properly. I had like 50 videos sent from Chris which I had to get through. Each one, of course, made me chuckle and respond with the stupid laughing face emoji. My attention was taken as one of Amelia's friends, Beck, started yelling obnoxiously about getting this party started, which made the other young adults scream in agreement. My social battery was nearing the negatives, and I'd only been here for half an hour. It was going to be a long night. Beck pulls out the clear Ziploc bag from her satchel, raising it high as if it was Simba and she was Rafiki. The bag looked like it contained dried green herbs. I wasn't born yesterday, so I knew it was weed. I don't really care what others do, so I paid little attention to those around the room. It wasn't until Amelia came up to me, her eyes bloodshot and glassy, that my attention was put in something other than my phone. She had a dazed and blissed-out expression. There was another pang of something similar to jealousy when seeing how free she was. "Soph, babes, you fucking need to try this," Amelia says, her body wobbling slightly. Inebriated, Amelia always made some funny memories. "I'm good, Ames. You know I don't like that kind of stuff." I say back, and she loudly boos at me. "Come on," she drags on. "You won't be able to do it next semester, and I'm leaving soon, so it'd be the last time we can do this." She pouted. I could almost guarantee this wouldn't be the last time this group got together and got high. But you can't reason with Amelia when she's like this. They are all lucky their courses don't require them to complete drug tests, otherwise they'd all be fucked with how much they do this, so Amelia was way off. "Maybe another time, Ames," I say finally, and she nods and frowns deeper before walking practically stomping away. I remember sighing and bringing my attention back to the window, watching the dark waves crashing into the sand. We're gonna go for a swim," Kyle says, starting to remove his shirt, and I groan. It was too cold for this shit, but reasoning with them would be pointless. It was dark and winter, And hopefully there'd be no sharks out there, because I don't want to see a remake of Jaws. The group started making their way to the soft sand of the beach, and I followed behind dutifully. The cold air bit at my skin, and I wish I brought a better jacket. Beck and Amelia walked a little slower, not the full-on sprints that Kyle, Alex and Danny were doing, them stripping off their clothes as they ran. I beat the urge to roll my eyes at them and continued to find a spot to sit. Amelia and Beck both had joints lit as they inhaled the drugs, and they joined me on the beach. Their clouds of smoke, and I laughed softly as my breath started to cloud as well. Beck pointed her joint at me, offering it without asking, and I shook my head to decline again. Amelia whined that I never do anything fun, and it stung a bit that she was right. I was boring, but at least I knew that. Still hurt when your friend confirms it. You know, they're doing studies of how weed is actually beneficial, especially if memory loss is involved. My head turns fully towards Beck, and she grins. Beck was the friend studying to be a therapist, so I guess she would know the newest trials happening in the world of brain science. "What's that got to do with anything?" I asked, and she smiled politely, joint hanging out of her mouth as she rolled another one. She lit the new joint with the old one before tossing the butt of the smoke into the sand to extinguish. "You know, your childhood, your weird, repressed memories." Beck trails off, and I bit my nail nervously. "You know, your childhood, your weird, repressed memories." Beck trails off, and I bit my nail nervously. "That would help?" I ask softly, and Beck grins. "Honestly, even if it doesn't help, it's not like you can forget more about your childhood." Beck responds, and Amelia laughs before becoming solemn. "What if she repressed her memories for a reason?" Amelia asks softly, and I felt a shiver crawl up my spine from something other than the cold ocean air. "Shut up, Amelia. Do you want her to smoke it or not?" Beck snips, and I was about to rebut until the three shivering purple bodies approached us, looking miserable. "We're going back inside," Danny says, shivering and covering his crotch with his hands and clothes. "Why would you let us do that?" Kyle asks, lips completely devoid of any pink, looking like he just ate a blue lolly with the shade his lips were. "Don't blame us. You're the idiots who wanted to swim." Beck retorts, and Kyle shakes his soaked hair over the top of us, the water so cold it felt like being stabbed by tiny ice picks. Beck and Amelia screamed, and I just brought the jacket closer to me. "Here, you can have this one," Beck says, handing me the joint she just rolled and lit. There was about 3/4 left of it, and she placed the joint in between my fingers, both her and Amelia watching on eagerly. I hesitated. I could smell the burnt broccoli scent from the joint and recoiled, but slowly I brought the offending item closer. I closed my eyes and took a toke. I think I inhaled too much because there was nothing but pain. It was terrifying. My lungs hurt and my throat hurt. I started coughing so hard I thought I was going to pass out. I felt dizzy and disorientated, and like all my skin was buzzing. I could barely hear the laughs from Beck and Amelia over the sounds of my blood pumping in my ears. Eventually the pain subsided, but the coughing was still prevalent. "Why the fuck would you make me try that?" I asked, wheezing between every word. "You'll be fine. Keep smoking though. You'll get better the more you do it," Amelia says with a nod, and I slowly bring the joint back up, inhaling with Beck's instructions. It was better this time, the coughing not as rough. My body felt like it was humming. I don't know long weed is supposed to be in your system before you start feeling the effects of the THC or whatever chemical it is that makes you high. We sat on the beach for a little while longer, until my joint was complete and we shared the last one that Beck rolled. I felt at peace. I think for the first time in 22 years, I had a wave of calmness roll over me. Beck was wrong so far about the memories, but I've never been so relaxed before. or so hungry. We must have all been on the same wavelength, because Beck and Amelia stood up, wobbling as they stood. "Come, we'll go back inside. They definitely have frozen pizza slabs that would go hard right about now," Beck says, and I laugh as they help me stand. The dizziness I felt as I stood was something else. The world moved in ways I don't remember. Up was down and down was up, but there was something familiar about the feeling of dizziness. I tried to cling on to the familiar feeling, but it was fleeting. As we got closer to the flat, we could see all the lights were on, and the boys were dancing to some unheard music, still in nothing, but at least their privates were covered. This time. The closer we got to the flat, I don't know. It was weird. I felt like I was on the verge of a panic attack. There was just too much going on. There was a constant buzz in the air, one that I feel like it was always there, humming in the background. It sounded like electricity. I missed the peaceful and calm feeling. Panicked and high is not a good combination. Beck and Amelia were the first to go back into the flat. Still, I hesitated before reaching out to touch the door, and as suspected, the jolt of static arced from the metal door handle, zapping my hand, resulting in my letting out a yelp like a kicked dog. The zapping had nothing to do with the weed, however. My whole life I've been conductive. Every door, every bit of metal, I will always zap myself. My hair will always retain a static frizz no matter what products I use or YouTube videos I watch. Sometimes I'll even mess with electronics. Chris said I'm cursed, and he never let me near his computer as we were growing up. Which is fair. This is only relevant since the zap was just worse tonight. I swear it left a red mark. I never thought the zapping had a meaning. Why would it? It happens so often I never pay attention to it. But after the events of last week, I know there has to be more to it. The rest of the night was okay. I ended up having more fun with these 5 people in one night than I have in the 4 years I've known them. Since I could no longer drive, we had decided to stay the night. I won't get into the shit show that was the sleeping arrangements, but I had taken the couch, secluded and away from everyone. Something I desperately needed as the high was starting to wear off, and I was getting sleepy. I will say this, the first half of my sleep was the best sleep I have ever had. The second half, however, well, that's why I'm posting here. It wasn't the sleep itself that left me horrified. It was my dream, then what followed after. It's left me with more questions than answers, and I'm sorry. I'm trying to keep my thoughts in order. They keep jumbling up. I'll try and write down what I can remember from my dream. So, in my dream, I'm sitting in the lounge room in my mum's house, the one I grew up in. I'm in the middle of watching my cartoons when the TV loses service. This was one of those old TVs every house in the 90s and early 2000s had. Large and box-like, just like the one we had when I was a kid. The TV wouldn't regain the picture no matter what I did. I tried playing with the antenna, moving the ears so much the only thing that would change was the clarity of the sound. I tried hitting the top as I'd seen people do in the movies, and still no results. I even asked for Mum's assistance, but she ignored me. Even my prayers were left unanswered. So, I was left to my own devices. The TV would not work, no matter what. All I could do was sit and stare at the static that buzzed around the screen, flashing a black and white grayscale. Where this started to get scary was when I focused on the sound accompanying the hum of the static. There were whispers coming from our TV, and they weren't the voice lines from the show that was supposed to be on. I never changed the channel, so it should have been lines from the cartoons I was missing. These voices were horrific. They were deep and raspy. They sounded like my grandfather, who was a chronic smoker. The croakiness and roughness of the voice still gives me shivers just writing about it. The voice was whispering to me. "Come closer. Come closer, Sophie," the voice had said. Part of me moved back in fear, but the other part of me wanted to move in closer, to listen to the mysterious voice. "Come to us, Sophie." The voice continued, and even in my dreams I still felt compelled to shuffle closer. I never noticed until writing this that the voice was saying us and we, as if there were more than one of them. There was a familiarity around this situation, like I had been in it before. Except last time, I wasn't alone, and the TV wasn't talking to me. "Come, Sophie, we know you want to." It continues, the voice adding a cheeky lilt to the sound, like it was trying different things to get me closer. I had risen to my feet, still unsure about this, and had decided to go find my mum. Surely she'd know what to do with a staticky TV. "Anna misses you so much, Sophie," the voice whispers, and I turn slowly back towards the TV, ice traveling up my spine. I start moving closer than before. "Anna?" I whispered, the name sounding foreign, like I haven't said it for years. "Anna needs help, Sophie. Will you be a good big sister and help her?" It taunts, and I could feel tears well up in my eyes at the idea of Anna being trapped and needing me to rescue her. I was frozen. "Where is she?" I asked in a small voice. The TV remained silent until I got closer. "She is with us, in here. We will never let her go. Join us. Join her. She will suffer without you." The TV practically growls this, still the voice never rising above a whisper. I sobbed. Where was my mum? Where was my sister? I was alone in this room with the TV seemingly getting bigger and bigger. "Where is she?" I yelled louder, moving closer. The deep voice chuckled. There seemed to be different layers to the laugh, like there were multiple voices all speaking in unison. The laughing got louder and louder until I had to cup my hands over my ears to try and block it out. It wouldn't stop. From what I could see through my teary eyes, I saw the TV's static move around, almost as if it was portraying shapes. I was still close enough to the TV that I could feel the heat coming off the screen and the way my hair was being attracted to it, almost reaching towards it. I let my eyes clear in an effort to focus on the shapes in the screen. My eyebrows furrowed as I tried to make out the intricate features on the screen in front of me. The laughing seemed to have died down slightly. It was still there and loud, but I could pick up other sounds coming from the TV. Still not sounds from my show, but it was softer, quieter. It was crying. It sounded like a child crying. The shapes started coming together more until they started to resemble a face. A gaunt, thin face with sunken cheeks and hollowed eyes. It was a little girl, and she was crying. The laughing continues, but I paid little attention as I bring my face closer to the TV than ever before, placing my hands on the warm glass. "Anna," I whispered, and the figure looked up and through the screen, and the girl moves closer, still crying but hiccuping at the same time. Anna used to cry the exact same way, hiccuping through her tears. I always found it adorable, so this must have been her. "Ophi," the girl whispers, and all the laughter stopped. "Anna!" It was a scream mixed with fear and desperation. There were too many questions to ask, and no one who'd be able to answer them. Anna continued crying and reaching for me through the TV. I'm scared, Ophi," Anna whispers, and even though I'm crying, a small smile still graces my lips. It had been so long since I've heard Anna say my name. She never could say it right. Funny how all these facts are bubbling to the surface after being buried for so long. I had so many things I wanted to say, so many things I needed to say, but every word was caught in my throat. I couldn't speak. I could only take in the image of my sister, fuzzy and distorted by the static. There was no sound other than the hum from the TV and the hiccuping from my sister. It was so quiet, it was a relief. I couldn't wait to tell Mum that I saw Anna again. She would be so happy. Maybe she'd start smiling again. Any pleasant feelings I were having were stopped abruptly, by a loud scream coming from Anna as a shadowy hand seemed to wrap around her face. She was fighting against it, resisting as much as she could. I punched and smacked at the glass of the TV, begging the monsters to take me instead, to give me Anna back, but they didn't listen. Slowly, Anna's features melted away from the screen, leaving nothing but empty static in its wake. I wailed. What more could I do? I just hung my head and cried. My hands were still pressed against the glass, my hands buzzing from the screen. There was nothing to fill the room but the sounds of my cries and the hum of the TV. After what felt like an eternity, I looked up, and as I did, a shadow crossed the screen, so fast, and reached out towards me. It was so quick, I barely had time to react. A black silhouetted hand seemed to have encased my flesh one. I fought against it as my left hand seemed to disappear within the static. There was a sensation akin to pins and needles, as if I had fallen asleep with my hand in an odd position and the blood was starting to circulate again. I screamed and fought back against the shadow, trying everything in my power to bring my hand back into the real world. I used every bit of strength I had in my body to reef my hand out of the TV. I screamed for my mum, but she never came to help. I was completely alone with nothing but the monsters in front of me. After a while, struggling the whole time, I started to feel myself get tired, but I mustn't have been the only one. It felt as if they lost their grip on my hand, because I could finally pull my hand out. My hand was red and bruised, but as I backed away from the TV, my hand clutched securely to my chest. There was a loud roar from the box. It was so loud I had to cover my ears again. I could feel liquid sloshing in my ears as the TV cracked right down the screen from the noise. That was when I woke up. If I thought the dream was the worst of it, I was wrong. I think I screamed myself awake. However, I woke up. I've never jolted upright so quickly in my life. My heart felt as if it was trying to leave my ribcage. I don't think it's ever beat so hard. My hands were grasping at my chest, and I could feel myself hyperventilating. It felt like water was coming out of my ears, so instinctively I brought my hands up to check. I didn't notice at the time, but there was a light source filling the room, and from the light I could see something way too dark to be water covering my hands. I was confused and disorientated. The room was filled with a grey flashing light, which, after getting my bearings, I realized was coming from the large flat-screen TV the boys had mounted on the wall. In all my 22 years of life, I have never seen an advanced flat-screen, smart, whatever you call it, TV ever produce an old-school static screen. These screens died out with the analog TV. It has been almost a decade since I'd seen a real screen go static like this. It was unnerving after the horrible dream I had. As I stood to find the control, I felt woozy, dizzy, like I was suffering with the worst case of vertigo I've ever had. My head was practically swimming. My balance was starting to return, and the search for the TV remote continued. As my back faced the TV, that was when I heard it. Knocking. Something sounded like knocking on glass. There was nothing outside from what I could see, but the knocking sounded like it was coming from inside the living room. A horrible idea crossed my mind, one that made ice traveled up my spine, and the shiver made my teeth rattle, and it wasn't from the cold. Slowly, so very slowly, I turned around, bracing myself for what I would see when I looked at the TV. When nothing was there, I let out a long breath. A sigh I anxiously held in was released, and my tense shoulders began to loosen. I started to feel a little foolish. I'm not even sure what I was expecting, but I looked away from the screen to continue the search for the remote control. After what seemed like forever, I still couldn't find it, so I decided to just turn it off at the TV. Most TVs had a button to press to manually switch it on or off, so I figured this would be the same. As I got closer to the large screen, still flashing black and white static, my stomach seemed to drop, like my body was reacting before my mind knew what was happening. As I was about to turn the TV off, I heard the soft hum I've been hearing my whole life. It was quiet and constant. The sound was emitting from the TV, making my hair frizz up, like in my dream. I needed to pinch myself to bring myself back to reality, but before I could do that, faces flashed across the screen. I screamed and jumped back. This was when everything starts to get fuzzy. I remember seeing the shadowy figures, like the hand from my nightmare. They looked like they were circling something. I remember them screaming loudly and hearing the high-pitched wails of someone in pain. Something snapped in me when I thought I heard Anna yelling for me. I smacked at the TV. I remember screaming at the top on my lungs, swearing at the figures, bargaining for Anna's life in exchange for mine, but they fell on deaf ears. Could these monsters even hear me? I didn't know, but my fear was turning into rage. "Give me my sister back, you fucks," I yelled at the screen. I threw the first thing I could grab, which was an expensive-looking lamp at the TV. I don't know, maybe hoping if I broke it, it would spit my sister out. They still showed no sign of hearing me, just continued to eat, kill. Whatever they were doing to Anna, I moved closer. "Anna! Anna, can you hear me?" I continued to scream. "Give her back!" I roared this time. I don't know when it happened. There was another flash, and one of the shadowy figures were right in front of the screen. Its hand was outstretched towards me in the real world. Before I could step back, his hand connected to my head. I could feel as the long, spindly fingers of the creature burrowed deep into my head. It felt as if it had cracked my skull open and was poking around in my brain. Its fingers were under my eyelids, in my ears, completely overwhelming me, scratching at my skull like rats. "We still have your sister." It speaks directly into my brain. I shuddered, but was frozen. "This is all your fault," it whispers harshly. I wanted to know what it meant. I wanted my sister back. "We will feed on her for eternity." Its hand seemed to rip from my head, and I felt my eyes roll to the back as the lights are switched on. I seemed to have started convulsing. I heard a couple of people speaking. I couldn't understand everything, only bits and pieces, but I couldn't open my eyes. Remembering these now, I can sort of put together who said what, but I haven't confirmed this with Amelia yet. "What the fuck, she broke my TV?" "I'm calling the Ambos." "Did you lace the weed with something?" That's about the last thing I remembered. Next thing I knew, I woke up in hospital. It was 3 days since the party, and no one knew what happened. Beck swears that the weed wasn't laced with anything, and since she grows it herself, I believe her. I also didn't smoke enough to green out and hallucinate. I've never had a seizure before. I am not epileptic, and neither is anyone in my family. No one has had a history with seizures, mental illness, or hallucinations. I had to clarify this with 3 different doctors, since none of them could piece together what caused the seizure. The only thing they could deduce was that my brain had slight swelling, and my ears were bleeding, which was a sign of massive trauma. But no one could figure out why. I didn't want to divulge the certain events that preceded this, but I knew it had to be the reason. After I was released from hospital, Amelia had brought me home to look after me. I knew she felt guilty, and I felt like an asshole because this has created a rift between the friend group. Amelia still accused Beck of lacing the weed, and even though I try to advocate for Beck, they've both stopped talking. The next day, Chris showed up. All Amelia had to say was that I was just released from hospital, and Chris dropped everything to check on me. He was given the same bullshit answer I gave everyone, but he saw right through it. So I ended up telling him and Amelia the whole thing. Funnily enough, I was expecting them to call a mental hospital and accuse me of needing help, but they didn't. They listened and hugged me. I don't know if they are thinking I'm delusional and are going with it to keep me placid, which they both deny, but come on, who would admit that? A scary thing that confuses me more is when I heard Amelia's side of things. She says she was awoken by Beck because she heard me yelling and was too afraid to check on me herself. I must have woken everybody up since they all seemed to have gotten to the lounge room at the same time. They saw me screaming at the TV, then me freeze, start shaking and then collapse in seizures. My eyes were apparently open even though I couldn't see anything, and my ears were bleeding. The TV screen was also black. Apparently, the whole time I was screaming at it, it was never on and there was never a static screen. Turns out I did break the TV, but also an expensive lamp that was a family heirloom. Sorry, Kyle. Chris convinced me to post here, so I hope someone has had a similar experience. Maybe even seen the shadow people in the static. I just need someone to confirm this, because I feel insane. Over these past couple of days, I seem to have remembered more about my sister and more about my childhood. Part of me wants to try smoking the weed again. Maybe it is the key in unlocking my memories. I just don't know if I'm game to try it again. I might also reach out to my mother and maybe see if anything I remember actually happened and hopefully corroborate some of my thoughts. If I have any updates or you want to know more, I'll keep posting on here. But for now, I am done. I definitely need to watch some Disney movies or some shit. I'm so fucking scared. Ever had a buttermint? Most people nowadays haven't even heard of them, much less tasted one. If you have, then you know that the name is a misnomer. They're not minty, but rather rich and milky and sweet. It's a vanished taste from a vanished world, the world of my childhood. I grew up in South Boston in the 70s, attending St. Bartholomew's Church School for the greater part of my primary education, and when I taste a buttermint now, I see glimpses of that vanished world again. Black robes whipping around corners, choral voices ringing down marble hallways dappled with wan wintry light, snow falling silent on the statues standing sentry in the courtyard, and I see her, fixing me with her steady gaze, smiling her private little smile. When most people think of Catholic school, they imagine one of two things: grim, hardened harridans rapping on students' knuckles with rulers, or pederast priests getting handsy with the altar boys. Let me address the latter right out of the gate and say, I was an altar boy for many years, and nothing like that ever happened to me, though I heard rumors about it happening to others, and there were certainly a few priests on the staff with whom you wouldn't necessarily want to be caught alone in a room together. As for the former, well, don't get me wrong, plenty of the nuns who taught at St. Bartholomew's were happy to fill that role. Sister Catherine was a mean hand with the paddle, and if you saw a student hobbling down the hallway, you knew it was her handiwork. Sister Anne preferred torment of the psychological variety. Everyone remembered the time she brought Bobby McNamara up to the front of class to confess that the stains on his pants were not from water. But on the whole, most of the nuns at St. Bartholomew's were harried and well-meaning women doing the best they could with difficult circumstances, and several were teachers I remembered for the rest of my life. Sister Eloise, who taught the humanities, infected me with my love of literature, and kind Sister Margaret would dispense tissues and listen to my tearful accounts of schoolyard injustices. And then there was Sister Joan. Sister Joan was the headmistress of the school and something of an enigma. For one thing, she seemed far too young to hold her position. Her age was difficult to place, but her features were still described as pretty and not yet handsome. Most of the boys at the school would have crushed on her from afar, if they dared, but none of us did. Something about her forbade it. It seemed like she'd know. She looked younger than most of the staff, but they treated her with a respect and deference bordering on terror, something which didn't escape the notice of the students. We'd look on with bafflement and high amusement as the classroom tyrants who ruled our days were reduced to stammering sycophants in Sister Joan's presence. What made it even odder was how benign and mild Sister Joan's demeanor was. When she made her rare drop-ins to classes, she would graciously accept the teachers' prostrations, and then she would urge them to continue. She'd stand silently in the back of the classroom, hands tucked primly in her habit, surveying us with kind eyes and a serene smile. She was always smiling private little smiles, as if she was in on a big joke that the rest of us were not privy to. Another strange thing about Sister Joan, we almost never saw her. The priests and nuns on the staff were well integrated in the community. You'd see them at church, at the grocery store, at community events. Many of them were regularly invited over to our parents' houses for dinner. Sister Joan made no such house calls. You could walk the halls of St. Bartholomew's for weeks at a time and never catch a glimpse of her. And then one day, you'd stumble upon her standing alone amidst the statues in the garden or staring out the window at the rain. On such occasions, she'd always greet you by name and ask how you were doing. She seemed to know every single one of her students' names, as well as details about their family life, their hopes, ambitions, talents, fears. No one, however, seemed to know anything about her. Only the oldest members of the staff could remember a time before she ran the school. Not that they'd suffer anyone impertinent enough to ask questions about her. When they did speak of her, the staff would speak in tones of awe and reverence. Some of them seemed convinced that Sister Joan was a living saint. Us kids filled in the blanks about Sister Joan with outrageous rumors. She's the bastard child of a Kennedy. No, idiot. She's the daughter of the Pope. One particularly imaginative boy claimed Sister Joan was an immortal being who had lived through the Crusades. It seemed as likely as anything else we knew about her. She had her mysteries and eccentricities, but mostly, us students liked Sister Joan. She never raised her voice in anger, and while she permitted corporal punishment in the school, she did not practice it herself. She was of the opinion that a long talk with a student was all that was necessary to correct misbehavior, and she seemed to be right. Only the worst cases, the repeat offenders who failed to respond to the paddle or the cane, were sent to her office. When we saw them again, they'd be changed. The rowdiest and most defiant children would come back from her office and sit meekly at their desks, sucking on a buttermint. Another quirk of Sister Joan's, she would keep the candies in a jar on her desk and dispense them whenever she felt the proper lesson had been learned. I remember one day when Michael Broyles' name was called. Mikey Broyles was the terror of my days, the self-appointed antagonist of my life, and he had promised that very day that he'd find me after school and give me the thrashing to end all thrashings. I do not recall what offense I had committed to earn this sentence. But midway through the day, a sister interrupted the class to announce that Michael Broyles was to come with her to Sister Joan's office immediately. Mikey mustered the best swagger he could, making sure to shoot me a look of malice as he left. I didn't permit myself a feeling of triumph or even relief. The punishment would be even more merciless now that he believed I had tattled on him. I spent the rest of the day imagining the cruel fate I no doubt had in store, but when, despite my best efforts at avoiding him, I bumped into Mike in the school hallways, he didn't even look me in the eye. He gave me a little half-hearted push, and then he kept on walking, eyes on the floor. He was worrying at a wrapped buttermint in his hands, not eating it. For a moment, shock overcame fear, and I called out to him, "Mikey." He turned around and regarded me for the first time. There was a dazed and distant look in his eye. It wasn't me, you know. A non-committal grunt. I was beginning to curse myself for not taking the opportunity to run. "I didn't report you. I mean..." He finally unwrapped the buttermint and popped it into his mouth expressionlessly. He let the wrapper drift to the floor. "Okay," he said, and then he kept walking, nonplussed. I reflexively bent down and picked up the discarded wrapper. It depicted a cartoon boy and a cartoon cow with identical smiles. Something about it unnerved me. I tossed the wrapper into the nearest trash can and then hastened home before Mikey changed his mind. I never had trouble from him again. Did I wonder what Sister Joan had said to him? Of course. But I wasn't one to look a gift horse in the mouth. Anyone who could reform Mikey Broyles was surely an agent of God. Anyway, it wasn't as if it was a position I'd ever be in. I was a model student with a clean record. Nothing would happen to me. I was 13 when my turn came. A few months after I turned 12, my parents pulled me into the dining room and told me without meeting my gaze that they were getting a divorce. Enduring your parents' divorce is never fun. Perhaps you can imagine how nightmarish it was in the insular world of Catholic Boston in the 70s. My family was ostracized. The other children began to avoid me, as if divorce were a plague I could spread to their families. My teachers were even worse. I hated the looks of pity in their eyes, as if they expected me to go down a bad path and regretted that they couldn't stop it. I did my best to live down to that expectation. I became cynical, disillusioned, apathetic. Both my parents were too occupied with their mutually assured destruction to notice my burgeoning career as an aspiring dropout. Most of my teachers gave me more leeway than they might have another student, but the more they gave me, the more I tried to take, and in time, the inevitable happened and Sister Catherine hauled me into Sister Joan's office. As we entered the room, I noted how bare and featureless it was. It was austere even by St. Bartholomew's standards, barren white walls, barren white desk, a single chair. There were no icons, no crosses. The only ornamentation in the room was a painting on the wall. It was by one of those phantasmagorical medieval painters whose names I would know if I paid attention in art class. And it depicted in sallow and feverish brushstrokes a huge, squatting, toad-like demon with cold black eyes. The toad was gorging on sinners, their eyes wide and mouths agape as they tried to claw their way out of his gaping jaws. Sister Joan was standing behind her desk, hands folded primly in her habit as usual. I hadn't seen her in months. She looked genuinely pleased to see me, as if we had come upon each other by happenstance. Sister Catherine shut the door and directed me to the only chair. I sat on the chair and folded my arms. Defiant, I noticed the jar of buttermints before me. It was the only thing on the desk. The little boy and the cow beamed at me from the candy wrappers. The longer I looked at their eyes, the more they looked like that of the toads in the painting. I thought of Mikey Broyles, that 1,000-yard stare he'd had, and I started to feel that inexplicable, unnerving feeling again. I fought it down and told myself that at best, I was in for another beating or a moralizing lecture, both of which I had practice in suffering through stoically. And at worst, I was going to be expelled, which at least would free me from a school I had come to loathe, though the beating my dad would give me would make any thrashing I got from Mikey Broyles pale in comparison. Sister Joan regarded us in her smiling silence. She seemed to be waiting for one of us to say something. Finally, Sister Catherine cleared her throat. Sixth offense. Sister, I finally despaired of the boy. Sister Joan looked at me with interest. Sixth, is it? That is impressive. There was amusement in her cool, mellow tones. Sister Catherine frowned. Forgive me, sister, but this is no laughing matter. We've tried and tried and tried. The boy should be expelled. I'd say that rests with me, wouldn't you? Sister Catherine lowered her eyes. Yes, sister. I assure you that I regard this with the utmost seriousness. Now, the nature of the offense? Sister Catherine perked up at the opportunity to air her grievances. Mr. Sullivan, as you know, has consistently failed to turn in assignments. When I confronted him in class today, he hurled the most vile and horrid epithets I have heard in over 40 years of teaching. That is all very vague. Sister, I'm going to need a little more than that. What exactly did the boy say? Sister Catherine reddened. Must I repeat it? Sister Joan raised her hands in theatrical helplessness. How can I arrive at a fitting judgment when I do not have possession of all the facts? Very well. He called me. He said I was a decrepit old crone worshipping at the altar of a fairy tale. Sister Joan's face remained controlled and impassive, but something about it suggested that she was on the verge of bursting into laughter. I see. For all the other students to hear. Oh! They heard all right. I could hear them sniggering in the back. Sister Joan loudly cleared her throat. Yes, that is very serious. I will not tolerate being abused by students. Sister Catherine was working herself into a righteous fit. I didn't sacrifice decades of my life to be treated this way, and I don't see what can be done for the boy. What are we going to do? Call his parents in? She snorted. I tell you, this is what comes of broken families. Give it a few years. Mr. Sullivan will be out on the streets and... Sister Joan raised a hand. I'm sure we're all very interested in your predictions, Sister Catherine, but unless you have been gifted powers of prophecy, for now I must ask you to forbear. Please leave us. I will take matters in hand here." Sister Catherine glared at me one last time, and then she left. We listened to her angry footsteps recede down the hall, and then the room was dead silent once again. No ticking clock, no humming fan. Outside, a light dusting of snow was falling. Of all the ways I had envisioned the dreaded summons to Sister Joan's office going, Sister Catherine being mocked and dismissed was not one of them. It seemed too good to be true. I tried to keep my guard up and prepare for whatever else was coming next. Sister Joan was smiling at me again. I apologize for Sister Catherine. She believes her small-minded timidity to be moral uprightness. We can allow her these little illusions, can't we? Her expression grew serious. You, on the other hand, have fewer illusions than you did before, don't you? Am I going to be expelled? I asked. Sister Joan ignored this. You know what I think, Thomas. I think you're experiencing a crisis of faith. Perhaps you feel you have learned too early that adults are flawed. Perhaps you feel that there was some more perfect version of events that was supposed to take place until your life took this abrupt left turn. Perhaps you've seen all the adults in your life fail to keep up their obligations, so you don't see any point in keeping up yours. Am I hitting near the mark? I had nothing to say to this. No one had ever summed up so perfectly what I was feeling before, and I'm not sure anybody has since, bizarrely. I felt a wave of tears welling up, and I hated myself for it. I don't want to talk about this with you, I mustered. I don't want to talk about this at all. Sister Joan reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. I think I can help you. Would you let me? Blinking back tears, I looked down at my hand hanging limply in hers. I saw then that both her hands were webbed and ridged with scars, as if from burns. They looked a little like mine did after I'd been in the pool too long. How did I not notice her scars before? Her hands were always concealed in her habit, I suppose. I don't know why, but I saw those scars and then I decided. "Okay," I said. She smiled and squeezed my hand again. Her grip was very tight. That was how we ended up walking down the hallways together. Classes had just finished for the day, and the corridors were filled with shouts and laughter and gossip. More than a few heads turned our way as Sister Joan steered me through the tight-packed crowds of students. Several hooted and whistled. "Tommy boy finally got expelled," one cheered, but Sister Joan silenced all of these with a mild glance. We pressed on, down hallways and several stairwells, making our way deeper and deeper into the bowels of the school. The crowds began to thin out, the laughter dying in the distance. I looked out a window at a crowd of kids throwing snowballs at each other. "Where are we going?" I asked Sister Joan. "Trust me," she said. We passed through a succession of locked doors, which Sister Joan opened with a ring of rusted keys. I noticed we were entering the older wing of the school, which had supposedly been a plague hospital or an insane asylum in the Victorian era, or so the students whispered, though they were never clear on which. There were no classes here. The school used it only for storage space. The walls here were damp and dingy and peeling. Faded green windows in rusting doors peered into dark rooms where dust collected on old furniture and medical equipment. We passed an ancient elevator shaft and rows of old hospital beds propped end up against the wall. The air began to feel stuffy and unseasonably warm. It smelled of mildew and rot. At last we came to a dark green door at the end of a long hallway. The door was triple latched and barred. I looked up at Sister Joan, and she smiled encouragingly. "What is this place?" "I am with you. You are safe. But what is it? Why are we here?" Instead of answering, Sister Joan proceeded to unlatch and unbar the door. The sound of its opening echoing through the empty halls was far too loud. The creaky hinges yielded to reveal a rusting metal staircase descending into pure darkness. I backed away several paces. "We're not going in there, are we?" Sister Joan shook her head at my silliness. "It's the only way. Thomas, there's nothing to be afraid of. I'm not going down there." "I understand. Truly, we won't do it. I think perhaps I misjudged you. I thought that you were so bright and fearless a boy that the usual forms of punishment, suspension, expulsion could be waived. I see that I was wrong. Shall we go back to my office? I peered down into that absolute night. Almost everything in me was screaming to be anywhere else but here, in this place, with this woman. But another voice, a smaller but equally compelling, whispered to me that it wanted to know, wanted to see what was down there, wanted to see if it could confirm all the worst suspicions it had ever had about life. If you don't step down there, it said, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering. Yes, you will, said Sister Joan. Her face was shrouded in shadow. As I watched, dry-mouthed, she raised her scarred hands and removed her coif, shaking out her long blonde hair. She bent down to my eye level and looked me in the eye. Do it, Thomas, for me. I walked through the doorway and into the dark. Sister Joan swung the door shut on me. I shut my eyes just before the door closed and the last of the light was snatched away. All I had now was darkness and the sound of my own breathing. For a moment, I thought I could hear Sister Joan's light laughter on the other side of the door, but I might have imagined it. I stood there, stone still, for I don't know how long. When I finally mustered the courage to open them, I found the effect to be identical. I waited for my eyes to acclimate, but the dark remained impenetrable. My legs grew weak and wobbly, and I had to sit down. Oh, Thomas. Sister Joan's sing-song voice through the door. Thomas, Thomas, Thomas. I can see you sitting there on the top stair. Thomas. Poor thing. That's not good enough. Thomas. Down the stairs. Thomas. My legs were still trembling too much for me stand, but I could feel my body begin to move almost of its own volition, and I began to scoot my butt down the stairwell, down and down and down. Something sharp, a rusted nail perhaps, tore through my pants, but I carried on, heedless. When I looked back up, I could see the faintest rectangle of light where the door was. I knew now that whatever awaited me at the bottom of the stairs couldn't be worse than what awaited me at the top. I kept going. In my memory, the staircase goes on forever, hours and hours and hours, but it could have been 2 minutes. All I remember distinctly is listening very, very carefully for the faintest sound, trying to control my heavy breathing. When I finally felt my feet hit what felt like solid ground, I did not wait. I did not linger and try and make out the details of whatever was down there. I immediately began scooting back up the way I had come, hoping it would be enough for her, hoping she'd let me out. I was perhaps a quarter of the way up when I heard the first sound. The faintest, smallest little click just at the edge of hearing. An image popped unbidden to my head then. An image of Mikey Broyles trying to scare with his brother's switchblade a few years before. What sound had the blade made as it leapt out? Click. I pissed myself then, but I hardly let it stop me as I continued to mount the stairs one by one. No longer trying to control my breathing, trying to convince myself that the hoarse and shallow breaths I could hear following me up the stairs were mine alone. My progress was abruptly halted by a shooting pain in my leg. Whatever sharp thing had torn my pants on the way down had done a bit more damage on the way back up. I looked up at the door, calculating that it was maybe 15 steps away. That's when I felt something else, the gentlest little poke at one of my feet. I looked down and saw there by the weak light of the door a pale, fleshy hand spider crawling up my leg. A large shape was huddled there, a couple steps below me. Its breathing was shallow and rapid and pained. As the hand made its way up my leg, I saw that, like a glove, the skin gave way at the wrist to raw, bloody flesh, twining tendons and muscles and a paler hint of bone. The rest of the shape followed the hand, hitching and dragging itself up the stairs until it was hovering directly over me. Some part of me went away then. I don't think it came back. The rest of me was sprawled on that staircase beneath the shape. By the dim light, I could see the barest suggestion of a face overgrown with scar tissue, weeping with pustules. Its skin was covered with a fine layer of viscera, like a newborn's. 2 watery blue eyes regarded me sightlessly. One of its hands poked and prodded and inspected me everywhere. The hand held the switchblade, which gleamed like an eye in the darkness. Do you think? A voice, flat and monotone, Do you think you know? The switchblade was raised. The index finger from the other hand hovered in the air, and as I watched, the shape took the blade and methodically peeled the skin from the finger. Blood ran in droplets down his hand and fell onto my clothes, my skin. Do you think you know? The shape took the knife blade and slipped it under the fingernail, ripping it out, roots and all. Do you think you know? The next finger. The next. Skin fell, molted, to the stairs. The man's hands became so slippery with blood that he dropped the knife and had to grope for it and pick it up again. Do you think you know? 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 His voice gained no urgency. No tempo, as he attended to his task. When he finished peeling his hand, he turned the knife to the skin remaining on his face. Do you think you know? Do you think you know? His words became unintelligible as his mouth filled with blood. With a ruined hand, he grabbed a large flap of skin from his mouth and cheek and ripped it away, revealing a set of incongruously white teeth. Then he took my hand in his and flourished the knife once more. He brought the knife down ever so gently into the flesh of my finger, producing the smallest drop of blood. Then he let the knife clatter to the stairs. He gripped the hand he'd pricked between his own and squeezed it very tight. He kneeled above me. My hand collapsed in his for the longest time, and then he bent down and embraced me. Do you think you know? He whispered in my ear. I could smell his breath. It was rich and sweet. When I came to, I was lying alone on the stairwell. My clothes were soiled with blood and urine, but I was unharmed, except for the little prick on my finger. I could make out a slug smear of blood leading back down into the darkness. I groped around on the stair until my hands gripped the switchblade, and then I began crawling back up toward the light. When I made to pound on the door, it instead swung open, spilling me out into blinding whiteness. Sprawled there, too worn out even to cry. I blinked until things swam into focus. A face above me, smiling warmly. Sister Joan, her coif back on, her habit neatened. You've done so well. Thomas. So well, she said, pulling me back on my feet. She scrutinized my blood-soaked face and dabbed pointlessly at it with a handkerchief. There are those who believe innocence is a virtue, Thomas, but innocence is ignorance of suffering. And how can we hope to help this fallen world if we do not understand what it is to suffer? I stared at her uncomprehendingly. Do you understand now? Thomas, do you understand? She smiled. You will. Then she placed something in my hand and tousled my hair. I looked down and saw it sitting in my palm. A buttermint. Sister Joan provided me with a mismatched set of clothes from the school's lost and found, and I stumbled home that day looking not much worse for wear. If I slept walk through the next few days and the next few weeks and the next few months and the next few years, it was hardly out of the ordinary. I was a child of a broken family. After all, my parents blamed themselves. I attended St. Bartholomew's for only a few more weeks. I looked in the eyes of the other students and tried to find the hollowness that I saw in my own. I saw Sister Joan only once more, flitting by me in the hallway on her way to more pressing business. She turned her head to me and shot me a little wink. That was my last day at St. Bartholomew's. A few years ago, I returned at last to St. Bartholomew's Church School. The school had shut down in the 90s and remained condemned and abandoned in the years since. I happened to catch a headline in a local newspaper discussing its impending demolishment, and I felt that old dark urge to see, to know coming back. Hopping the chain-link fence now surrounding the property, I ambled about the grounds, taking my time, not sure if I was savoring or delaying what I had to see, what I had to do. The statues in the garden noted my passing, most of them now limbless or headless. Casually, leisurely, I grabbed a stone and smashed in a window. Casually, leisurely, I walked through the hallways and corridors and listened for the sound of choral voices, of children's laughter. Just at the edge of vision, a woman in a black habit led a child by the hand through the halls. All I needed to do was follow them, through a succession of locked doors smashed open with my shoulder, past dusty rooms full of relics, past an ancient elevator shaft. Readying my gun and my flashlight, I unbarred and unlatched the door and pulled it open. Did my legs wobble as I descended that staircase? Perhaps. Did I gaze back up the stairs and half expect to see her standing at the top of them, young as I last saw her, smiling down at me? Maybe, but she wasn't there, and I kept walking, noting the bloodstain about 15 steps down from the door. Back then, the place at the bottom of the stairs felt vast, possibly endless, but now I found a cramped and tiny room, the ruins of what was plausibly once a bare mattress on the floor, a rocking chair in one corner, a rotting teddy bear in another, a pile of spider-webbed and moth-eaten rags, which looked like what remained of an old school uniform. Before one wall was constructed a crude little altar. Depicted on the wall was a smiling child, holding the hand of a smiling woman in black. On the altar was a pile of discarded candy wrappers and a switchblade. I opened the knife. Click. The blade was still sharp, like new. Do you think you know? Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.